everyone. My name is Heather Antos, senior editor here at IDW over the Star Trek line, and I am joined today by none other than Jodi Hauser. Jodi, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, when my editor tells me to do something, I do it.
And I love that about you, Jodi. So Jodi, we're here today to talk about Star Trek. And what better place to start than what is your Star Trek origin?
For me, it's a little bit weird. I came into Star Trek through both of my grandmothers. My dad's mom was just a huge Star Trek fan, going back to the original series. And when I visited her, I used to like sit in bed with her and watch Next Gen. My other grandmother, who grew up in Boston and was not necessarily a sci-fi fan, knew Leonard Nimoy when she was a kid, and he was friends with her older brother, and they supposedly dated a bit as teens. So on my mom's side, we'd watch like the marathons of the original series, and it would be like, oh, there's grandma's friend. So yeah, I sort of had Star Trek coming at me from both sides in very different ways. And so yeah, it's just been a part of my life since I basically can remember.
So you're saying there's an alternate history where you might be related to Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah, and one of my dreams had always been to like hopefully meet him at a con and see if he remembered my grandmother and get like the actual story from him, since there's some disagreement in the family, and sadly I didn't get to do that before he passed. But yeah, there's definitely an alternate reality where he's maybe my grandfather as well as like everyone's honorary grandfather.
I love it. I love it so much. I mean, who better than to have Spock as your grandfather, right? Yeah. Well, you're no stranger to Star Trek, both in fandom and in writing. I know you most recently were part of Star Trek Year 5.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that was just, it was such a good experience. First of all, because I got to work with my two very good friends, Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly, who were show running the project. But it's also the comics project I've worked on that was sort of most treated like a TV writer's room. We would get together, hash out like the full year's worth of stories. We actually got to do it at the Star Trek archives. So we got to go like look at props and costumes on our breaks and be just like happy little nerd people. And yeah, just everyone in the writer's room just meshed really well. We always got the work done faster than expected because like everyone's first idea was the right idea. It was just one of those working experiences where everything just like fit together perfectly and went so well, and you kind of get spoiled for other projects where it's like, what do you mean I need a second idea? But yeah, the whole thing was just lovely, and I actually did get to name some characters in there after both of my grandmothers. So
full circle.
That was really nice.
Oh, that's so awesome. That's so sweet. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Couple characters in there.
The scientists in my first story arc are named after my dad's parents, and it was the Andorian presidential candidate who is sort of introduced in the Mud arc. Is her name is, if you untwisted around, is my other grandmother's name.
Oh, that's so cool. There's nothing more fun than sneaking family members and friends into fandoms, right?
Yeah, just sometimes they get upset when you kill them off, but it's comics, they'll probably come back.
Exactly. Well, now you're soon to be writing a new Star Trek story for us. And I say soon to be because we are in the very early stages of planning. Jodi, you're coming on to write the Trill one shot as part of our Alien series. How's that been?
It's really exciting. I've always found the Trill race really fascinating. I did see a little bit of DS9 when I was younger, but I really actually visited the series as an adult, and because it was one that all my Star Trek loving fans loved the most. And I feel like the Trill are one of the more interesting, just very sci-fi feeling aliens in Star Trek. It's such an interesting setup, to have the symbionts that are just sort of carried through the generations and become like a living memory, and how that impacts the hosts and how the society looks at how you're dealing with previous host relationships and all that stuff. It's just like all good science fiction, it raises a lot of really interesting questions and gives you a really vast playground to just sort of pull different strings and see what happens. So it's the type of stuff I love writing.
Yeah, and for those who don't know what a trill is and what a
Oh,
symbiont is, yeah, do you want to give us just a little bit about that? Because that is really the crux of who the crux of who the trill are.
yes, the Trill themselves are a very like near human looking species, as many aliens in Star Trek are. You've probably seen them. They have these sort of dots that go down their face and down their arms. But there are some members of the Trill species that actually host creatures called symbionts inside of them, and these get moved from host to host because they live much longer than the Trill themselves. So they sort of carry the memories of their previous hosts. So it really is a true like symbiotic relationship. They end up keeping each other alive, both physically, and then after the Trill host has died, part of them is still living on. And it's just really sort of fascinating and very different. Probably the best known one is Dax from DS9, who was originally Jadzia, and then oh no, how embarrassing, I'm blanking on the name of the second Ezri. Dax.
Yes. And then you have on Discovery now you have Gray and Atira.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it is a very interesting species, the thought of like passing on and supporting another being through you, and everything that comes with that is there's a lot of fun that can be had with that story. Speaking of, do you want to give us a little tease of what our story is?
Yes, our Trill host is named Vanna, and she's someone who was originally approved to be a host, but then just kind of went on and lived her own life and passed up the opportunity. She was someone who just really valued her independence and liked her life the way it was. And, obviously bringing another creature inside of you is a sort of a big upheaval to all that. But then through circumstances, she ends up becoming a host a little bit later in life. But it is a symbiote that carries some baggage, as she is soon to learn, and that sort of upheaval she was always sort of maybe worried about becomes much, much, much bigger and crazier than she ever expected it would. So yeah, a lot of it is just sort of dealing with someone who didn't think she was going to end up being a host and does, and how her life changes. So it's a lot of fun playing with that and playing with how the memories from previous hosts like seed into her life. And yeah, I love writing things that sort of get a little bit trippy with structure and aren't necessarily completely linear. So yeah, this was a really fun opportunity to get to play around with a lot of that, and comics is perfect for that.
Yeah, we're planning on a lot of visual fun. Well, Jodi, thank you so much for joining us today, and everyone out there, be sure to pre-order Trill at your local comic shops and check out Jodi where you can find her online. Thanks, Jodi.
Thank you. Back to writing.
Well, hello, Christina. Thank you for joining us today to talk about all things Star Trek. Now, before we get into it too much, what is your Star Trek origin?
My Star Trek origin would be with my grandmother. So she was a huge Star Trek fan and would watch the original series often. She had a cat named Mr. Spock, so a big orange tabby named Mr. Spock. And my grandma was, she was very religious and would watch like Jim and Tammy Baker, like the PTL Club, but also loved Star Trek. And so that was something my brother and I would watch with her. And, when the Star Trek Barbies came out in the mid 90s, that was what we got her for Christmas, which I think she liked. So, so it very much just reminds me of growing up, and going to my grandma's house and watching it with her. So Star Trek has very kind of warm familial meaning for me and my family.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. And funnily enough, you were not the first person in this panel to have had Star Trek grandma origins.
Really?
Jodi Hauser, who we just spoke to, who is writing the Trill one-shot in the Alien series, also was introduced via her grandmothers, and they had connections to Spock as well. So I'm sensing a trend in our creators. That's so great, though. I love that. So are you a TOS? Is that your Star Trek, would you say, the original series, or do you have a favorite amongst
No,
the others?
I know, I think as I've gotten older, so I watched The Next Generation a little bit when I was in my 20s. And actually recently, like my husband, during lockdown would just kind of have Deep Space Nine running in the background. So at lunch when we'd sit down, and so I've actually developed a big affection for Deep Space Nine. And so, no disrespect to my grandma, I don't know, Deep Space Nine might be that might be my jam now. That might be my main jam.
It's my favorite too. It's all right.
Yeah.
You're in good company. Oh man. Well, speaking of Deep Space Nine, speaking of Trek, you are on board for one of our amazing alien one shots where we're doing a deep dive into different species of the Trek tribes. You are writing our Ferengi one shot. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how that came to be?
Yeah, so I had been one of the writers on the My Little Pony series for quite a while. So I wrote about 25 issues of that. Never once working with Andy Price, I might mention, who was one of the main artists on Ponies. So I was a little bit bitter about that. So I also write nonfiction. And so I had kind of trailed off on Ponies for a while because I was finishing up a biography of an actress named Jane Russell. And I finally finished that up and contacted Megan and said, well, I know Ponies is done, but what do you have? And she said Star Trek, which I gotta admit, a little bit intimidating because it's a big universe with, really passionate fans. And so I said, okay, well, what are you doing? And when she said we're doing aliens, so, alien one shot, double issue, pick an alien. Yeah. And just immediately I thought, well, I would like to write something a little bit more female oriented, which can sometimes be a challenge with Star Trek. And just immediately I thought of Ishka because we had been watching Deep Space Nine, and I thought, no, Ferengi, and that's it. And I usually like to pitch like 3 different stories, and like the Ferengi story that I ended up writing, it just came to me immediately. Like, this is a story I'm going to tell, with Quark and with Ishka. And that was the one thing I pitched. And fortunately, it all happened and it all went well. And Andy Price is drawing it. So all of the wrongs, yes, all of those wrongs. Now, all the pony artists I work with were wonderful, but not having worked with Andy, that has now been rectified. And I found out that he was doing it, and I got the cover and all at once. And the cover for this issue is amazing. So yeah, it has been a wonderful experience.
Yeah, and I will say, editing this issue, it's unlike any other Trek story that I've worked on and I'm doing, and it's so much fun, and just it's Andy's great. He's bringing his own spin and sense of humor to it. I don't know if you saw the pages I shot to you
yes,
beforehand. Yeah,
I did.
Very psychedelic. And yeah, do you want to give us like the quick log line of what the Ferengi one shot is?
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially, Quark finds out that his mom has been running kind of an underground railroad to get, suppressed women off of Ferenginar and into the Gamma Quadrant. And so he needs to try to stop her, as he sometimes does, before he gets the backlash from it, or does he?
Or does he?
Yes.
And there is root beer.
There is root beer. Yes, that was the one note I got going in, was to make sure there was root beer.
Yes. Oh man. So as someone that I was going to bring up, like, you have such a vast range of genres and styles that you write, from the glitz and glam of classic 1940s Hollywood women to My Little Ponies to now Star Trek. I mean, like, when are we going to get a crossover of all 3?
Oh, I would love to do that. With Ponies, I would do it, whether people realized it or not. So one of my issues of Ponies is a whole tribute to a Howard Hawks film from 1938, Only Angels Have Wings. I'm sure nobody realized, nobody in the world caught that but me. And so I would, my favorite actress is a rather obscure one named Anne Dvorak, who I wrote a book on. And so King Dvorak was one of the characters in Ponies that actually ended up making it into the series. So I get things in here and there, but I would take on a full-on pony Star Trek Hollywood glamour 30s Los Angeles crossover, if you'll let me.
I mean, I'm putting it out there. I've been asking Trek to let me do a Ponies Trek crossover. I think there's a Trek actor who did voice a Ponies character, so it's already it's already out there. It can happen, but
it's predestined. Absolutely.
Predestined. Oh my goodness. Well, man, Ferengi's coming out soon. Sooner than I think I realized it'll be out in April. So probably just around the time this panel comes out. So definitely check it out. And Christina.
Yeah, and I have to say, I have learned how many people in my life love Star Trek, which I was not aware of, because when this comic got announced, I had people coming at me from all directions, going, "Oh my God, I can't believe it!" So, it's been really exciting, and people are really thrilled about it. I think far more than anything else I've written, people are excited about the Star Trek comic. And I'm just, my grandma's no longer around, but I got to think she's somewhere and approves, even though Mr. Spock is not in this comic.
Well, that just means we'll have to have you back to write a Mr. Spock comic and get a cat cameo in there.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Christina, and everyone be sure to pick up Ferengi.
Yes, thank you. Enjoy. It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Hello, everyone. And now I'm joined with infamous Star Trek writer Mike Johnson, who has written more Star Trek comics than pretty much anyone else ever. Something like that. Maybe we got to count. But yes,
we're going to count them live right now.
Right now. That is going to be this interview. No, folks. So welcome, Mike Johnson. Mike, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Heather, our editor extraordinaire, who has beamed aboard. I was going to say recently, but you've been on for we've been through a few wars together. So love having you on the books. And excited to talk about.
Let's talk about Star Trek. So for those not in the know, and if they're not in the know, then get in the know. Mike Johnson right now is currently writing a ridiculously fun series called Star Trek Discovery: Adventures in the 32nd Century, where we're kind of jumping around all over the place, exploring some different characters. Mike, do you want to tell us just a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, we figured we would do a 4-issue series and take advantage of the space that we have in the comics to focus on characters that usually don't get a ton of screen time. So the first issue had to focus on Grudge, the queen, space cat of all cats, and that one just came out, so you can find it. Well, I guess we're talking to the future right now. So you're in the future. So a couple issues will be out, I think. And the second issue will focus on Adira and shows some of her backstory that we haven't seen in the show. The third issue we're very excited about, which focuses on Detmer and a piece of her past that can't wait for people to see. It's a really cool visual departure from what we're used to. And the fourth issue focuses on Linus, everybody's favorite Saurian officer, and a fun little story about that. So we're all really excited about this, the chance to do something different, and the chance to do something that only comics can really do. So can't wait for you guys to see this.
And I look, I have to start back at the beginning. Discovery #1, Adventures in the 32nd Century, Grudge, the queen, the space cat. What was that like, getting into the head of a cat to write this? I mean, like, good. Really, like I grew up in a cat family. Not a family. I wasn't raised by cats. Not a cat family. But we always had cats, and so I was used to how cats can be, and so it was kind of fairly easy to slip into the POV of a cat, as opposed to other alien species that we sometimes work on. But and then the show sets it up so well, because the show does just enough to establish Grudge's character, and Grudge is always kind of around. So it was fun just to tell the story and to write in that voice, right? Like, that's another great thing the comics can do, is you can slip into these personas and write from that POV. So that was great. I mean, that was such a joy to work on you know, I'm definitely allergic to cats, so I was not raised by a
Oh, no,
family
I
of
didn't know that.
cats. But I like reading that. I'm just like, this is a cat's personality. Like you got it, you got it to a T. It was
Nice,
amazing and
nice.
super fun. And you know, even if you're not a Star Trek fan, even if you're not a Discovery fan, like it's such a fun issue. Like regardless, you don't need to know anything about Star Trek to enjoy
Yeah,
this cat focused issue. So
yeah.
yeah.
It's the story, but if you like cats, definitely.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's something where again, you're focusing on characters that don't get a lot of screen time. So like in TV, obviously the shows are so sort of contained by how much time they have to focus on a given character. And they're trying to tell two stories at once. You have your A story, and then you have your B story. And we're kind of doing the C and D stories, not lesser stories, but if every episode was 3 hours long, you would get to see these stories. And that's why comics are great, because they're just able to widen the canvas.
Yeah, and speaking of the shows and screen time and all of that fun stuff, because you're working on the TV show tie-in comics, essentially, like, can you tell us a little bit of that process and how that works on your end to stay in line with all things cool with the shows?
Yeah, so my partner on the comics is Kirsten Beyer. She's consulting on this series, and she's like intimately involved in the show. She was on the writing staff of Discovery. She co-created Picard. So deeply involved in that. Right now, she's literally today, as we're recording this, is in the writer's room on Strange New Worlds. So one of the benefits of the biggest benefit of having somebody that tied to it is we know what's coming ahead. I mean, we know stuff that's happening that hasn't even been announced yet, and we're able to calibrate the stories that we tell based on what's coming. And then also Kirsten helps with just knowing how the characters should sound. You know, we all watch the shows, so we all know kind of from an audience's perspective whether the character sounds right or not. But then when you're on the other side writing them, you have to be able to produce that, especially because comics is a written medium. We're used to meeting and knowing and getting to know the characters through sound and picture, obviously, and performance, especially. So it's that trick of like translating performance into the written page. It's sort of like a circular process where they write the scripts for the shows, they're performed by actors, and then in the comics and novels and other ancillary things, we sort of translate back into the written word. So having Kirsten there, who is there at the beginning, is perfect. So
Yeah, and that also speaks to like how much, you know, the artists have to bring to it too, right? You know, like that the acting on the page has to match to a certain extent the acting on the screen, you know, having the characters' reactions and expressions. And you know, we're partnered with such a brilliant art team on Hal Hernandez and JD Metler on Inks and Colors for the Discovery series, that like, I mean, it's just a treat every day we get those pages in our inbox.
It's great. And Angel does I mean, we get his roughs, which are incredible, his layouts, I should say. And then a day later, we get his black and whites, his inks, which are incredible and could be published on their own. And then you put JD on top of that, and his colors are just like, they're like the ILM, the special effects for the comic when he comes on and adds his brilliance to it. So it's a great team. And Angel and I have worked together on a bunch of Star Trek stuff, including the Green Lantern series. So we have a pretty good shorthand in terms of I can write knowing how Angel draws, and hopefully he can anticipate knowing the kind of scripts he's going to get. So that's a huge benefit. And having someone that good, I'm always worried about someone snapping himself up, but we're doing Heather, you're doing a great job locking him down for Star Trek.
Well, don't worry. If anyone's going to steal him, it's going to be me, but for another place.
Yeah, for something else. Yeah, for another Star Trek thing, hopefully. Yeah.
Well, needless to say, if you are a fan of the Star Trek TV shows right now on Paramount Plus, definitely check out Mike Johnson's books. That's Star Trek Discovery Adventures in the 32nd Century, but also just a little tease, there are maybe some more to come. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike.
Oh, thank you. Good to see you.
Well, hello. Right now I've got Scott Tipton and David Tipton. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk all things Star Trek. How are you guys?
Doing well.
Good
Thanks
to
for having
talk
us.
to you.
Now, for those who might not know, y'all have been involved with Trek for quite a bit. I'd love if y'all could give us, what is your Star Trek origin story?
Dave, you want to start?
You gotta
We
duke
always
it
get-
out.
We always get these questions, so we always think about how we want to answer it. I mean, Scott and I were reading Star Trek comics a long time ago, so we knew the old Gold Key comics, and we knew the Marvel comics, and we were also big Star Trek fans for a long time too. So it really worked out well for us when we started working with IDW, that there was a certain amount of synergy there, and we kind of played off on that, and it's really worked out well for us, I think.
Yeah, and my fandom really kicked in right when Star Trek just took over like crazy, when there was Next Gen and Deep Space Nine and the Voyager, and the Playmates figures were in full swing, and there was just so much merchandising, and Star Trek had a presence like it never had before. And that was when I really clicked into, I'd always loved classic. I loved the movies. But then whenever Next Gen and those new series came in, that was when I really sort of clicked into the franchise.
There was that period when there was entire aisles of Playmate Star Trek figures right next to the Turtles figures.
I remember leaving Toys R Us with a shopping cart literally full of Next Gen figures.
Oh man, oh man. So I mean, you guys have seen a lot of different Star Trek, and one of the things I find most interesting about Star Trek versus other fandoms out there is, you know, how you can be fully engrossed with like Deep Space Nine or Voyager, but have total blind spots for like original series or Next Gen or things like that, right? Because of just how vast. I mean, Star Trek's been around for 60 years. It's insane. So, you know, and with that in mind, what is the best Star Trek?
Worst of all, some people don't have blind spots. Sometimes they have hatred too.
Oh, trust me, I'm a comic book editor. I know.
It definitely does have its own internal kind of battles sometimes. I mean, to me, I really liked Next Gen a lot. I was really looking for a new Star Trek. I didn't think there'd ever be another Star Trek TV series. And when Next Gen came out, I was just fascinated by it, particularly from a production and a storytelling element, because, you know, I was very familiar with the original show, but to see how can you probably do this again, I didn't think it could be done, and they pulled it off. And so seeing that for me with Next Gen was always fascinating.
Yeah, it was Next Generation for me too, because I was a kid at the original series, but with Next Generation, here's a new series where I got to be in on the ground floor, and I got to learn about these characters as they grew on screen. And there's a kind of a possession you take with that when it's a show that you're in from the very beginning, and you don't know what's going to happen, and new ones are coming every week, which I think is why you're seeing such a groundswell of Trek support now, because there's so much new content coming in. And it's one thing to be excited about a show you're watching on Netflix that was made 25 years ago. It's another when there's brand new content hitting you week after week with new stuff, and you really don't know what's coming next.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that now, comparable to what it was with Next Gen. That, you know, there was a period when you had Next Generation, you had Deep Space Nine and Voyager coming out rapid succession, and we're seeing and films too, and we're seeing a similar kind of situation now, I think, right, Scott?
Yeah, there's a vitality that comes with new content. That's great. And it's great for everybody.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, right now, oh my gosh, there is a Star Trek for everyone, right? Between like, Prodigy, between Lower Decks, between Disco, Picard, the movies, like there's just the novels, and of course the comics, right? There's just so much Trek out there. And speaking of the comics, and speaking of Next Gen, y'all have a very particular tie to both of those, writing the Mirrorverse version of the Next Gen storylines. Like that's got to be just your childhood dream come true, is it not?
It's been so much fun, and I mean, we've got to do so much crazy stuff and fun stuff over the years with IDW. We got to do some of the most exciting projects, but with this one, it was so completely almost unformed because of the way the project started, and it just fell into our laps wonderfully because of all the work that J.K. Woodward and CBS had done in just starting off with the concepts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the things we like about working on mirror stories is that You've got a little more breathing room in terms of canon. You don't have to worry about fitting something and making sure that every detail is exactly right, because you've got a mirror universe that's a little more opened up and different. So that makes it a little more of a relief. I mean, it's a different kind of writing, and it's a little bit, I don't want to say wacky, but if you look at especially the Deep Space Nine mirror episodes, they get kind of wacky sometimes too. And I think we do enjoy that a bit. And another thing we like to talk about with the mirror universe is that one of the things really interesting to us is that the mirror universe isn't an opposite universe, which sometimes people think everybody is evil and opposite. And there are opposites, but it's a twisted mirror, and some things are different, some things are the same. And so not everybody in the mirror universe is an evil version of themselves. And so seeing how those characters play out in that different universe and its own rules is always, it's got its own interesting set of storytelling to it, I think.
No,
Also,
for sure.
Yeah, and with the mirror universe, I mean, because when you're writing a classic Next Gen or even classic Voyager or DS9, you want to be true to Roddenberry's ethics, and you want to keep that feeling of utopia about it. And with the mirror universe, that's out the window, and characters can have ambitions they're entirely self-directed. Characters can be greedy and want things and do unsavory things to get them, and it gives us a way to take these established characters that we know and love and put them in positions that you'd never get to otherwise with Star Trek.
And that emphasis on ambition is what kind of makes the mirror universe, going all the way back to the original Mirror episode. And so I think that's one thing that's most fun, is seeing what happens when people have unbridled ambition, and where does that go?
Yeah.
I mean, that is all true. I do think it's very easy to say, the mirrorverse in Star Trek is everyone is just evil and swole, right? Like, I think that's that's the high concept log line. But whether or not that's true, as you so astutely put, David, exploring other ambitions, I think, is a very articulate way to put it. But the fashion of the mirrorverse is just, you can't compete with it.
This is where we were so lucky, because when we began this project years ago, this is our fourth mirror series now. J.K. Woodward had already designed all the characters, but there was no backstories, and so we were presented with what the characters looked like, and they said, "All right, now tell us who they are and come up with a story." And it's just this feast of the eyes with Riker's mysterious gauntlets and the scar and a slightly Borg-looking Data. We could take these things and just run with them.
Yeah, and a lot of those things that we took from J.K. Woodward's designs, the stories evolved out of those over issues and issues. It wasn't like just, oh, this is what the character is. I mean, we didn't tell the origin of Data for a while into the story. And that ended up being a very interesting story that worked out well with all of those characters, I think.
No, for sure. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me, and for everyone out there, be sure to pick up your copy of IDW Star Trek, The Mirror War, out at your local comic shop. We've got issues coming out throughout the rest of this year. It's going to be a blast, and certainly will not be the last we see of the Mirrorverse. Thank you guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.